I wanted to go to LSU again tonight because we had overwhelming feedback when we talked about LSU the other night. There's this strange thing when we talk about LSU. Number one, we have a lot of Tiger fans who watch the channel and who are subscribers. But then, because of the run they went on last year, I think LSU, at least for the time being, has morphed from a regional brand into a national college football brand. And the way you know that is when I can go in our analytics and I can look at the geographical metadata. I got folks watching these LSU videos from all four corners of the country and in between. So they're moving the needle pretty much anywhere where we have subscribers. And so because of that, I've followed up a lot on this LSU deal. Things aren't good down there. I think that's pretty obvious to anyone who has watched an LSU game this year. What are the problems, though? Like if you're the kind who checks in for 3 hours on a Saturday, but then you live your life Monday through Friday, and you don't really keep up with the inner workings and the behind-the-scenes whispers, rumblings. Well, number one, you probably live a lot more stress-free life. But number two, you know the team's bad. You may not be aware that, the team element, what is a team? It was never there. We've talked about that a lot now, about LSU. Just never was a team this year. There is a massive Title IX investigation, the report from which is due in February, which could derail all of this. And by all of this, I mean up to and including the man Colin is showing you on the screen right now, Ed Orgeron. We'll talk about that in a second. There's been a lot of internal strife, both staff-wise and locker room-wise this year. The roster has been badly mismanaged. That is due to a number of things, not the least of which are just poor evaluations. There's no other way to put that. And then you add on to that internal strife, maybe guys not wanting to stick around. This is not the 4-H club where when someone just wants to quit, you could just add someone else. That's not the way a college football roster operates. And there were bad hires made. There's no other way to put that. And just a lot of this falls on the head man. That if you want to shoulder all the credit, you got to shoulder the blame. That's the way, when you're in a leadership position, that's the way it works. Two major questions. Can't get over these two major questions. One we asked the other night, and that is, how many of these problems are 2020? In other words, when we put the lid on 2020 and then we move on and we open up 2021, how many of the problems will still be there? And that remains to be seen. But the second question, and if you can figure this one out, then you let me know. Twitter DMs are open, inbox is open. Think about what I'm about to ask you. How do you address the element that has been viewed as both the solution and the problem within a 12-month span? Because that's Ed Orgeron at LSU. January, I was walking off the field in the Superdome in New Orleans. Ed Orgeron walked back out. I actually stood on the 20-yard line and talked to him in an empty stadium for a few minutes. Just kind of a surreal night. I mean, you guys who were there, this is it. Colin's showing it to you. A lot bigger crowd there than when I talked to him about an hour later. But that night, so euphoric. The feeling, so euphoric. It was unprecedented, but now the turn has been unprecedented. At this very moment in time, if you're watching and Colin's showing you, I mean, this is footage straight from the eye, Josh, just walking right off the field after a national championship win. At that very moment in time, had I gone up in that crowd and I would have slandered the good name of Ed Orgeron, folks in LSU would have been ready to fight you in defense of him. I kid you not. Now they're ready to fight you, in some cases, if you defend him. How does this happen? That was January of 2020. This is December of 2020. I'm about to say something else that I myself have a very hard time believing, but it's not coming out of my mouth. I'm just issuing a sort of parroted response or sort of a parroted forwarding of a message that I've gotten from some people that are in the know, in and around LSU, in and around Baton Rouge. This is not a joke. There are people who don't think he's going to survive this. And when I say this, I mean this in all caps, because it's not one thing. And to be honest, if Ed Orgeron was not the head coach at LSU for non-health related reasons, let's say, in 2021, if he were not the head coach there, my jaw would be on the ground. That would stun me. And it would be obvious, if he's not the head coach there in 2021, something much greater than football has come along to, as I said, derail what they've got going there. I don't care how bad you are on the field. The year after winning a national title, you can go 0 and whatever and lose by 1 million. You're not getting fired for football-related reasons. Even the most rabid fan base and the most rabid conference in America on steroids would never do that. However, we all know now there is more going on down there. That Title IX stuff's nothing to mess around with, and I don't have any details. I don't pretend to have any details on that, but I would just tell you there is, to say the least, a lot of uncertainty around there. So we go back to the question now. And this is going to be a question that's not going to be answered after the Florida game this Saturday or after, well, they're not going to a bowl game. More on that in a second. Just, such a stunning and brave move at the hands of LSU. But how do you rectify this? You want to put a positive spin on it. And I've seen some of you try and do it. I'm all on board with it. Trust me, a good LSU is good for late kick. And so I'm rooting for them. How do you fix it? How do we figure out a way to fix it? A lot of folks, well, I won't say a lot, there are folks who believe that they're just a few staff moves and another recruiting class and one more offseason away from largely seeing the dark clouds part and the sun shine through again. And I hope, again, for your sake, that's true. But I got to ask you, and this is kind of a rhetorical, we'll go metaphorical, rhetorical here. When we get that merch line going, that's a T-shirt. I think about it like this. If you got the right driver, if he's the right leader, if Ed Orgeron is the right driver for the finely tuned automobile that should be LSU football, then you could change the pit crew out and you may very well have yourself a championship caliber product again. But if you got the wrong driver in the car, it doesn't matter. If you got your little sister driving, if you got your grandma driving, the best pit crew in the history of NASCAR is not getting her to victory lane. And so the question becomes again, because a lot of these criticisms really are rooted in poor culture, which is cultivated or it's unable to be cultivated because of poor leadership. What are staff changes going to do about that? How is a new defensive coordinator going to change that? Like, I don't know those answers. And I'm very hesitant to buy into this notion that, a few staff changes here and there, that'll be the difference. Well, that old adage, rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, that exists for a reason. Like, you could make the deck of the Titanic look different. Doesn't matter. It's still going down. Is that what LSU football is? If so, it would be the most spectacularly horrific collapse in, I'm not going to say the history of college football, only because I wasn't around in 1937. However, it would be noteworthy. Let me just say that. So I think that we're going to see a lot of movement, to say the least. Staff-wise, they are in line to lock down a top 5 recruiting class, maybe even more lofty than that next week and then moving into the early portion of 2021. But this is, if you want something on top of your program, like if you're a Michigan State fan or a Colorado fan, if you want something to track on top of your program over the coming weeks and months, LSU football, there will be no shortage of news breaking out of Baton Rouge.